Hello, brilliant coders. My name is Shawn, and I will be your instructor today. You're watching Lesson 3 of the Java for Beginner series on the Coding with Shawn channel. Now, because this is Lesson 3, I'm going to go ahead and remind you, if you haven't already yet, please go ahead and go back and watch Lessons 1 and 2 because they are absolutely crucial to understand both Java as a whole and some independent elements of it that we learned in Lesson 2. Even if you have watched it but it's been a while back, I would still recommend you go back and at least skim through it so that you can get a refresher. And assuming you've done that, then let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to do today. So today we're going to have a few things that we're going to cover. First, we're going to start with talking about comments. Then we're going to go to variables. And within variables, we're going to talk about both variables as a whole and the types, how to print them, how to declare multiples, and something that we call identifiers. So we're going to do all of that today in this lesson. So if you're all set, let's begin. Alright, so the first thing you're going to want to do is open up IntelliJ IDEA or whatever IDE that you installed in Lesson 2. And open up your first Java program project, which should open automatically, but if not, just go ahead and navigate to it. So this is what we did in Lesson 2. We did a little bit of basic printing and a little bit of input. So go ahead and run it. And we're doing this just to ensure that all of our IDEs are working and doing good. Alright, so let's just put a random name. I don't know, Messi. Alright, awesome. So our programs are working. If they're not working, go ahead and pause, view the error, and try to figure out what's going on. If you can't figure it out, then the first thing you want to do is go ahead and just look up the error on Google. And if that doesn't work, again, feel free to write it down in the comments and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. But if this worked for you, then let's go ahead and get started with today's content. So the first thing that we're going to talk about are comments. Now, if you've used pretty much any other programming language before, then you're probably a bit familiar with the concept of comments, as they are extremely prevalent in most programming languages. So, but if you haven't, let's go ahead and talk about what comments are. So when we use comments, we're doing them to explain the code and to try to make it a bit more readable. It's also applicable in cases when we're trying to stop execution or running it when we're testing alternative code. So for example, if we're writing our code, we're writing, and something didn't work, so we're trying something else, but we still want to keep that old thing, then we would want to do something that we call comment out, where we just put it in a comment temporarily as we run our alternative code. And we'll get into that a little bit more in our future lessons. But let's go ahead and try a very basic comment. So go ahead and leave everything here, but remove everything between Scanner keyboard and keyboard.next, if that's still there for you. If not, then don't worry, it's great. Just go ahead and make it look like this. Go ahead and change what's inside of the quotes to simply hello world. And this is just for the purpose of the simplicity. So to do a comment in Java, if you've watched my Python for Beginner series, it's pretty much the same thing. We're just doing two forward slashes, and we can write anything we want for that whole line. So we could just say, this is an example of a comment. So what a comment will do, you create a comment with two slashes, and what that does is it reserves everything after the two slashes on the line. So at this point, every single thing we write, doesn't matter what we write, every single thing that we write on this line will now be a part of that comment. So, and if we run this program, then you'll see it just says hello world, and Java does not even acknowledge the comment. And that's because comments are for humans. And when the Java interpreter sees the comment, it just ignores it and skips it. Now, of course, we can do comments in like a line of its own, but what's convenient is that that's also possible in a line where there's already code. So for example, if we delete that old line and we're on this line, if we put 2 forward slashes here and do the same thing, this is an example comment, then this is still completely valid. If we run this program, you'll notice we'll get the exact same result, because comments can be put on either empty lines or lines where there are code, as long as it's after the code. So I hope that should be pretty simple for you. It's an extremely basic concept, but moving on, what we're going to try is something called a multi-line comment. Now, as the name suggests, a multi-line comment is just a comment, but instead of being on just one line, it takes up the span of multiple lines. So the way we start it is a bit different from a single line comment, and we're going to use a forward slash and then an asterisk. So any text between this and the ending for a multi-line comment, which is and actually, if you're using IntelliJ IDEA and you just click enter, then it'll do this and it'll automatically make the end for you. The ending is just an asterisk followed by a forward slash. So that's pretty intuitive. It starts with a forward slash and an asterisk and ends with an asterisk and a forward slash. Everything between this will be completely ignored by the interpreter. So we could say this is a multi-line comment. Boom. Notice this, it's all in gray, so it's all being accepted as a comment. And just to confirm it for us, if we run the program, all you'll get is hello world from the println. So that's pretty simple. And of course, this is just an example, but when you're actually programming, of course, you'd want to use comments that are a bit more descriptive and useful. So for example, you could say this code prints hello world, and this asterisk is unnecessary. So if we run this again, no impact from the actual comment, but now other programmers that are reading our code, or even us in the future, will be able to tell what the code does or some descriptive information about the code without having to really rack their brains trying to read the code and figure out what it would do. So that's pretty simple. Now, if you're trying to decide about what kind of comment you should use, whether you should use single or the multi-line, it's really up to you ultimately. But if you're making a pretty short comment, like for example this one at the top where it says this program displays hello world, you probably are just going to want to use the single line comment. But if you have a long comment, then you probably are going to want to use the multi-line. That way it's not too like crammed up in one line. But yeah, so, and one more thing, the multi-line comment is multi-line, but you can actually still do it on one line, if that makes sense. So like, of course, the way it's designed to be is like this, where, you have a bunch of lines of code, or of comments, but you can still use a multi-line comment on one line. So like, for example, we could have it here and say, this is a single line, multi-line comment. So notice we're using the syntax for a multi-line comment, but we can still use it on one line. If we run this, we'll see the program works just fine. So I would say it's bad practice to use a multi-line comment if you're going to just use it on one line, but I just wanted to let you know that feature does exist in Java. Alright, and that's all for comments. So now we're going to move on to variables. Alright. So variables are also something that are prevalent in other programming languages. So if you have used another programming language before, you might be familiar with this term. But if you're not, variables are basically containers in which you can store different data values. So in Java, there are a couple of different types of variables. Among them, there are string, which stores text, int, which stores integers or whole numbers without decimals, float, which stores floating point numbers, which are basically integers but with decimals, and char, which stores single characters like A or B, and boolean, which stores values with two different possible states, which would be true and false. So go ahead and you might want to pause the video, just look at this chart real quick. You absolutely do not have to memorize this. Just make sure you have a general understanding of the different types of values. All right, so let's talk about how you create or declare variables. So to create a variable, you have to basically specify a type and then give it a value. So the general syntax for that is going to look like this. You're going to put the type and then the name of the variable, so like variable name, and then you're going to give it a value. So whatever the value is there, and then your semicolon. So the type here is just one of the types that we just talked about, like float or int. And variable name is just the name of the variable, which again, it pretty much is completely up to you. There's only a few restrictions on how you can make variable names. And then the equal sign here is saying that that variable is equal to a certain value. So let's go ahead and try this out to make a variable. So let's create a string. And again, a string stores text. So we'll just say string name, and we'll say, just go ahead and put your name. So I'll put Shawn, do a semicolon, and now let's print this out. So if you remember the syntax, it's system.out.println, and in this case, instead of putting the string, we're just going to put the name of the variable. So that's name here. All right, go ahead and run the program, and voila. So your string name is equal to Shawn. So instead of just printing out name, it went ahead and printed out what the variable is equal to, which is the desirable output. So let's do some more examples. So let's say we want to store, instead of a name or a type of array, like some certain text, let's say we want to store a number. So to do that, basically what you want to do is change the type first. So let's do int, which is for numbers without decimals. And let's just say int number is equal to any. And just go ahead and put any number. I'll put 15. And then here, just go ahead and update the variable name. We change that to number. And then run the program. And notice it does exactly what it should, and prints what the variable is equal to, which is 15 for me. Now, another thing that you can do is declare or create a variable without assigning a value and then give it a value later. So you can like initiate it without any given value and then just give it a value later. And you might think, right now you might be thinking, why would I do that? Why not just give it the value whenever I need to? But you'll see as we get into some more complex Java programming that can actually be incredibly useful and important at times. But basically, what you want to do that is just remove the equal sign and the value and just say int number. And then you could say number equals 15 and leave the println the same. And if you run this, notice that we get the same output as previously. So the only thing that's different here is that instead of just doing it all in the same place, we first initiated it and then later gave it its value. Now, similar to some programming languages, Java has the ability to change the value of an existing variable. So let's say that we say the int number equals 20, but then at another point in code say that it's equal to 15. So pause the video and think about what Java is going to output from this. All right, so if we run this, it gives us 15. And so the reason for this is when we initiated or created the variable, we gave it the value 20. But before we actually printed it on the screen, we gave it the value 15. So, and that's what it prints out because that's the most recent update. If you got that correct, go ahead and give yourself a little pat on the back because you are well on the way to success. Okay. Now, we just talked about how you could change variables after you've created them. But a feature that Java has that many competing languages do not is you can finalize it, which basically means if you don't want other people or like other programmers or even yourself to unintentionally overwrite uh, variables, you can use a keyword called final, which basically will make the variable in its final form and unchangeable. So to do this, we want to just put the final keyword before initiating the variable. Now, to really visualize this, go ahead and print this. So it gives us 20. But if, like before, we try to re-give it a value, so number equals 15, then you'll notice that we get an error. Well, let's put the semicolon. That was my mistake. But if we run this, notice that we'll get an error because it says we can't assign a value to a final variable number. Like right here, we already, basically when we put final, what we're telling Java is that I've put this variable in its final form. I want to make sure that I don't accidentally change or edit it in the future. And Java saw that we did that, so it just threw us an error and it refused to run the code. And again, as we get into some more complex programming in later lessons, you'll really see how useful this feature can be. Okay. So let's go ahead and before we wrap up this general variables, let's go ahead and try to declare variables of all the types. So the first type we're going to do is int. Just go ahead and we already learned the syntax here. Just go ahead and put int number and a value. Now a float is pretty similar to a integer. Just go ahead and put float and then a difference, so you can say f number and we'll just give it the value 15.99. And notice that it gives us a red line here because when we are trying to tell Java that a number is a float, at the end of the number, we actually have to put the letter F. When we do that, Java knows that it's a float otherwise, and if we take this out, you'll notice that the IDE tells us that it thinks it's a double, which is actually a different data type. So if you're declaring a float, always make sure that at the end you put the letter F. The next thing we have is car, and we used this a little bit ago, but we'll put car, letter, and just go ahead and put any letter. So, and we do have to use single quotes for this, so we'll put, let's just say the letter P. All right. The next type is a Boolean value. So we already discussed that this was true or false. So I just put Boolean, bool, and again, the only values you can give a Boolean is true or false. So we'll just say true. All right, and finally is string. So string is basically just a multiple characters. So basically, it probably already makes sense to you, but just to clarify, a string is just several different characters put together, like a sentence or a phrase, or just anything where there's more than one character. So string, and here's an interesting thing. You can say string is equal to, and then just, hello world. Boom. Now, notice that for the variable, I put a lowercase s because we don't want Java to get confused and think that we're referring to the type string. So we can put string as the variable name because Java is case sensitive. All right. Now, I do want to note there are quite a bit more data types in Java, but a lot of those are completely unnecessary for our purposes. And as long as you know these 5, that should be enough for quite a while, because a lot of the other types are a bit more complex and not really necessary to know until you get to more of an advanced stage. If you do want to look, you can go ahead and just look up Java data types on Google, and you can see them if you are interested, but this is all you really need to know. Awesome. So now we've talked about variables in general. Now let's talk about how we can display them or print them. So to do this, we're still using the same method that we've been using, which is println. So let's say we want to print our names. So string, string, and then let's just say name, and put your name. So Shawn, and then system.out.println. Hopefully by now you're getting the hang of this syntax for this to print something. It's pretty simple, but you definitely do need to know this. I really do not like to tell you that you have to memorize something. That's like quite a rarity. You'll notice as you watch my videos. But system.out.println is something you just gotta know. So here we can say hello, and then you're gonna use a plus to concatenate, and then you're a variable. So that's name for me. Awesome. We'll run this, and we get hello Shawn. So the reason that there's no space here is because we didn't tell Java to give it a space. There's two ways we can do this. We can either say plus and then give it just an empty space and then another plus. If we do this, there you go, there's a space. And the other way that we can involve a space is by just putting a space in the hello string. Completely up to you, both ways work, and they work just as well. Alright, now here's an interesting thing. You can also, this plus character that we talked about to combine things, we can actually use that to add a variable to another variable. So let's say we wanted to put another, or we have to name it. Let's change this one to first name, and let's say last name. I'll just put coding. Alright, and then so what we can do here is actually make another variable, say string full name equals, and remember the variables can't have spaces, and then we can just say first name plus last name. And by doing this, we have combined the two variable names, and you'll notice when we print this, let's go ahead and print it, and it gives us the combined of these two. And again, if you want to add a space, you can just add a space in the first one. Boom. How cool is that? So for numeric values, the plus character, instead of combining them, it actually works as a mathematical operator. So instead of just like for example with the strings, it just put them together. With numeric values, it'll actually add them. So let's say we declare two integers. So let's say int x is equal to 10, and int y is equal to 90. And then if we do print ln x plus y, then you'll notice when we print this, it actually gives us 100 instead of 1090. And again, as our good practice, we can just put a comment here and says this will add x and y. And yeah, you'll notice that when you're using these integers or numeric values, it'll add them up as opposed to just combining them. Awesome. So that's pretty much it for displaying variables. It's pretty simple, and it's quite similar to just regular printing. And I hope that wasn't too complicated. If you have any questions, again, just write them down in the comments. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how you can declare several variables as opposed to just one. So if you're declaring more than one variable of the same type, you can use something that we call a comma-separated list. So the way that we just learned how to declare variables, you might end up putting x, y, x, or integer x, integer y, and integer z, like this, and then saying system.out.println, and then x plus y plus z. That's probably what you're tempted to do, and to be fair, it does work, but it's pretty inefficient, and it's wasting both the interpreter's time and yours. To make it simpler, we can just put it all in one line using commas to separate it. We can say int x equals 10, int y equals 90, and int z equals 100, just like this. So now when we try to run this, notice that it says it expected an identifier. So go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to try to figure out what's wrong. Did you figure it out? Well, what we did wrong here is we redeclared int 3 times. Again, Java is a language with a pretty big focus on non-redundancy. It doesn't like to repeat itself where it's unnecessary. So to actually do this properly, we only need to declare the integer at the beginning of the list. And when we run it now, it gives us exactly what we wanted, which was 200. So Java is, and I don't mean to say this in a derogatory way, but it can be a pretty picky language. So when you're writing your code, make sure that you're paying attention to things like this, because even like Java is a flexible language, but still at times it can be like this where you really do have to ensure that you're writing it correctly. But yeah, that's the correct syntax for a comma separated list. Okay, and here is something that I haven't seen in many programming languages. You can actually assign the exact same value to a bunch of different variables in just one line. So we could have one line where we declare it, so you could say int x, y, and z. And then in another line, we can say that x equals y equals z, and then equals 50. And you'll be pretty surprised. So go ahead and run this, and it gives us 150. So you'll see that all three, x, y, and z, were given the value 50, and when combined, they equaled 150. This is really not a feature that you'll see in every programming language, and it's part of what makes Java unique and a really good language for beginners and the like. So yeah, so really it's pretty intuitive here. You're saying that x is equal to y is equal to z, and z is ultimately equal to 50. So that means they're all equal to 50 by logical principles, and when you combine them, yeah, it equals 150. And yeah, that was it for declaring multiple variables. I hope that wasn't too overwhelming. If it was, again, just go ahead and rewind the video and watch it over again, because this is pretty important. Okay, let's go ahead and get on a clean slate here. So now we're going to talk about something very important called identifiers. Every variable in Java has to be identified using unique names, and these unique names are called identifiers. Now, they can be short things like x and y, like we used earlier, or they could be more descriptive, which is what we should be doing, like age, quantity, volume, effectiveness, all things like that. And it's important that we use descriptive names so that we can have understandable code, which is has a lot of clarity and isn't a headache to try to review. So let's take an example of good code and bad code in terms of identifiers. So a good code might have int miles per hour is equal to 60, and bad code might have int m equals 60. So this is good code because it gives us this is a good identifier because it tells us exactly what 60 is. Now m, it's okay as far as the interpreter is concerned, because as far as Java cares, it still is correct by syntax, but in terms of a human, they might not necessarily be able to realize so easily what m actually means. So whenever possible, you'd want to use the more descriptive option. So there are some general rules for naming variables, which are these. So they can contain letters, underscores, dollar signs, and digits. They do have to begin with a letter, and they also have to start with a lowercase letter to make sure that the interpreter doesn't get confused with commands. And there cannot be white space anywhere in the variable. Now, they can technically begin with a dollar sign and underscore, but we're not going to be using that in our lessons because it's not really. It can be appropriate at times, but for the most part, you want to start with a letter. Now, like I said earlier, Java is a case-sensitive language, so identifiers too are case-sensitive. So, like for example, animal with a lowercase a and animal with an uppercase a are different variables. And then there are some reserved words, like int or boolean, because they are commands and functions within Java, they can't be used as identifiers. They're names for variables. And in fact, with that, we've actually concluded today's lesson. Let's go ahead and recap. We talked about comments, both single and multi-line. Then we talked about variables and data types. We talked about how to print them and how to declare several of them, both in one line and by assigning a single value to several variables. And finally, we talked about identifiers, which are the names that we give to variables. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope that today's lesson was helpful. If it was, I really would appreciate if you consider liking and subscribing. And please do consider to keep watching this series so that you can improve in your Java. And you can also look at some of my other series like Python for Beginners or Python for Intermediate/Advanced, as well as some special editions which you might find entertaining and helpful. And yes, with that, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in another video.